Hey y'all, welcome to the Movie Howze. You're just in time to hear me talk about... I don't think I've ever witnessed a film that has had so much stacked against it as The Flash has. A production so troubled that it was inevitably careening towards the disastrous box office weekend that slaughtered both itself and Disney's Elemental this past Father's Day. And I feel y'all need to understand how we got here before tackling the movie itself. The Flash was originally announced back in 2014. It quickly got caught up in a tumultuous studio shakeup following Warner's cold feet at Zack Snyder's direction for the greater DC film universe. First, they were going to do a Flashpoint movie, then it became a Cyborg and Flash team-up movie before eventually circling back to a very loose riff on the Flashpoint storyline. At this point, the project had already burned through like 8 screenwriters and 5 directors before settling on its Andy Muschietti and the writer of Birds of Prey. The story would remain the same, and on paper it was a sound idea. Because its lead, Ezra Miller, was not a big name draw and WB rushed to Justice League in a vain attempt to catch up to Marvel, the Flash wouldn't be an established character, so instead of doing a straight Scarlet Speedster flick, the studio's first instinct was to do a cameo fest and slap Batman on it. Their big gun would be the return of Michael Keaton as the Caped Crusader. This casting started getting people excited about the prospects of the flick. But once again, Warner Brothers shot themselves in the foot. Leaks started confirming that this new take was going to have Batman and Superman replaced by Supergirl and Batgirl. Another studio shakeup results in them realizing that's a terrible idea, only there to check boxes and to improve ESG scores. So extensive and expensive reshoots were done, and the Batgirl movie was flat out shelved, never to be seen by the public despite essentially being finished. During all of this, both Marvel and Sony beat Warner to the punch with multiverse movies, leaving this concept feeling old hat, despite technically The Flash was the first one in production with this idea. Then there was, again, another regime change, where James Gunn, writer-director of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, came in and announced that he was going to take over the reins to steer DC towards a new direction. This not only meant that actors like Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, and Henry Cavill, mere weeks after announcing that he was going to come back for a proper Man of Steel sequel, were shit-canned, even though all 3 were widely praised by the fan base. This also meant there needed to be another round of expensive reshoots to remove anything that would be teasing further stories within the DC Snyderverse. At this point, the film's reported $225 million budget had in fact bloated to the most expensive movie that Warner Brothers has ever made. This was fast becoming an albatross hanging on the WB's neck. And since Gunn had prematurely announced his intentions to reboot the entire DC universe, well, that's not entirely true. Just everything that didn't co-star his wife. This meant that The Flash and every other film remaining on the slate would ultimately mean nothing to the greater scheme of things. So why would audiences care enough to show up opening day? Then things went from bad to Chernobyl bad, when the film's lead star kept popping up in the headlines for increasingly disturbing and violent outbursts, which included drunk and disorderly, assaulting women, breaking and entering, child endangerment, and accusations of grooming. At this point, realizing this was a sinking ship, all they could do is try their best to market the movie, highlighting the return of Keaton, the multiversal shenanigans, while downplaying Miller, not even allowing him to do the press junket. Early reactions, either genuine or shilled, hyped the movie up, but it didn't really matter. The garnish on top of this bullshit souffle is the fact that audiences are just checked out of cape shit. This being a success was just not going to happen. Ironic considering that the movie's narrative crux is about how some things are destined to happen, that no matter how hard you try to alter fate, the same conclusion will always transpire. So now that you know the true Hollywood story drama of all this and the movie is finally out, surrounded by controversy, late to the party as Marvel and the entire superhero genre falls apart around it, what did I think? It's a fucking mess, but in like a Star Wars prequel kind of way. Fun, but all over the place. The plot brings us back up to speed with Barry Allen, the fastest man alive and self-proclaimed janitor of the Justice League, after discovering he can use his powers to move through time. The Flash gets it in his head that he could go back far enough to prevent his mother's murder and his father's subsequent wrongful imprisonment. Despite the warnings from Bruce Wayne, he goes through with it and ends up screwing the entire space-time continuum. Now he's stuck in the 2013 of an alternate universe, mere days before General Zod's devastating attack on Earth, as seen in Man of Steel. But Superman is nowhere to be found. In fact, all the metahumans are MIA. So he seeks out Bruce Wayne only to find a Batman different from the one he knows, but one very familiar to us. With his help, they search for Superman, only to find his cousin Kara instead. So now the Flash, his more energetic and annoying 2013 counterpart, and aged Batman and Supergirl must attempt to stop Zod if they have any hopes of saving this world and possibly all the worlds within the multiverse. Before I go off on a tizzy, let me get my positives out of the way. I fully admit a big part of my enjoyment of this movie is the return of Michael Keaton as Batman. Respect to all the subsequent actors that have donned the cowl, such as Ben Affleck, who too is quite good here. But Keaton is the OG and will always be my movie Batman. And he's as good as he's ever been, slipping back into the role with ease despite the 3-decade gap. In some ways, he's the best he's ever been, with modern-day stunt work and special effects granting his fight scenes a level of acrobatic ferocity that could never been achieved with the original film's bulky, thick rubbered costumes. I know it's 100% nostalgia bait, seeing him and his wonderful toys set to Danny Elfman's classic theme, but god damn it still works on me. The surrogate father thing he's got going with Barry proves to me that if we had gotten a third Tim Burton Bat flick with Keaton, the inclusion of Robin would have worked, though maybe not with Marlon Wayans as they originally were going to cast. Another in the plus column, I was surprised how decently the film explains the rules of its time travel and multiverses, and also the extent of the damage that Barry has caused, from the grand scale to the minuscule. Like the realization that every 80s movie that Barry grew up watching now has a completely different cast, like Eric Stoltz is in Back to the Future and Michael J. Fox is in Footloose. I appreciated that little touch. Time travel and multiverses are stupidly complex concepts to try to get moviegoers to grasp. For every well-written example such as The Terminator or Back to the Future, you get something incomprehensible like Superman the movie or Avengers Endgame. I also have to give the movie some credit. It has a ballsy, very un-Hollywood resolution. If it wasn't for the joke that was tacked on literally at the last 30 seconds. But that kind of encapsulates The Flash. For as much as I enjoyed, there was equal to greater measures of bullshit. Now, if you don't want to see this movie because of Ezra Miller, I don't blame you. I think many abstain from seeing this movie for that very reason. Miller is a case study of how modern culture and social media can warp weak individuals into neurotic, self-obsessed sociopaths.
But if I had to stop watching movies due to them having terrible people in them, I'd have to throw out half of my collection.
Shit. When Zack Snyder originally cast Miller for Justice League, it made sense considering the makeup of the superhero ensemble. You already had 3 of the biggest giga-chads in show business co-starring, so making Flash the younger comic relief character worked, especially in the Snyder Cut. But Miller's also not a lead actor. This take on the Flash is spastic, socially awkward, and now there's 2 of them, with the younger one cranked up to 11. I thought this aspect was going to be insufferable, but I won't lie, not so much. A fair chunk of the comedy worked for me. Much of it didn't, sure. It helps that the movie seems to be aware of how grating the character is by having the older Barry chewing out the younger one for not understanding the gravity of the pickle they're in. This type of characterization is a disservice to Miller, who is a much stronger, dramatic actor than a comedic one. The schizophrenic last act works because as it goes on, the comedy gives way to tragedy and Miller is allowed to give a very solid emotional performance. Though it's hard to focus on that while they're surrounded by some of the most laughable CG I've seen in years. No, not every FX shot here is bad, but when they are, they stand out. For a movie this expensive, it is unreal how terrible the special effects are. You get the feeling that Warner's new head honcho David Zaslav was just like, we're done spending money on this movie. Assemble this monstrosity into something vaguely fucking coherent and release it. Taking Leonardo da Vinci's art is never finished, merely abandoned, to an absurd level. Before seeing the movie, I kept hearing on the interwebs that the cameos in this flick were insane. What cameos? That was just shitty CG. How am I supposed to be excited about finally seeing Nicolas Cage as Superman, as he was gonna be in the aborted Superman Lives from the late 90s, when he looks like a goddamn PS3 cutscene? No, that's actually not a spoiler. They talked about it in the press before the movie came out, so if you're gonna be butthurt, go bitch at them. The decision to evoke the overhated and underrated Man of Steel further contrasts not only how checked out Michael Shannon is here, but also puts a microscope on how unfinished this movie looks. Man of Steel came out a decade ago and completely dunks on this flick. From the intensity and sense of speed in the fight scenes to the blending of digital to physical with its suit mocap, which seriously, can we stop half-assing superhero costumes by making them CG? There are moments where the Flash looks like a goddamn bobblehead. Oh, and a tiny nitpick, and I fully admit this, but I really hated the fact that the Black Zero's gravity beam did not have the Hans Zimmer diegetic sound anymore. For shame. I had fears that Sasha Calle's Supergirl was going to be the typical insufferable girl boss that would curb stomp General Zod better than Superman ever did. But she ended up not being that. I mean, she's not bad, it's just that she doesn't have a whole hell of a lot to do. She comes into the movie too late for her to build up much of a character or camaraderie with the others, and is essentially a blunt instrument that can be thrown at Zod. If anything, this flick validates Man of Steel in a lot of ways, and this would have been far more interesting with Cavill portraying the emaciated Flashpoint version of Superman instead of just ticking boxes by adding a girl. At least then Barry and the audience would already be attached to the character to justify his late arrival. Lastly, once again, my main complaint with big budget movies shows up in full force: this movie's too long. The first half is especially egregious, where we're mainly following the two Barrys just waiting for Keaton to show up. Once he's there, the movie really gets into gear, so they could have cut out at least maybe 20 minutes to get to that ideal 2-hour runtime.
I'd only accept a longer cut of this movie if it was like for the original version before the edits and reshoots were done to it.
I bet much like the Snyder Cut or Joel Schumacher's first cut of Batman Forever, there's a better version of this movie left on the editing bay. Either way, I don't think it would change matters much. Audiences en masse have rejected the film. This year has been sobering for the megacorps. While stock prices tank and trust deteriorates, the Access Media will try and spin doctor this bomb alongside Elemental continuing the catastrophic implosion of the Disney Corporation. They don't want to face the hard reality of the situation. The common folk have realized how powerful they can be by simply speaking with their wallets, and it is dramatically affecting these companies' bottom line. But remove the movie from all this mess, judged solely by what's on screen, I marginally enjoyed The Flash. There's stuff I actually liked here. Would it be brave enough to say that this is an honest-to-God good movie?
No.
This is a patchwork of franken-fucked proportions. Per usual with DC, if you want to see a better version of this story, watch the animated Flashpoint Paradox. That being said, I was never bored here. Certainly baffled by many of the choices the film made, but I still had fun, especially with Keaton's return. And the ending did a lot to give it a bit of substance and pathos unusual for this type of movie.
I think as time goes on, I'll come back to this much in the same way I do Batman and Robin. Interpret that as you will. Because in the end, despite its best efforts to be a full-blown disaster, I still found The Flash to be a midway matinee.
But that's enough for me. I'd like to hear what y'all thought. Like, comment, and share if you feel so inclined. But more importantly, until next time, stay safe out there.